as pronounced Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. But when it comes to Elokim, they very often just say, including people with kippot on their heads, they will quite easily say Elokim as pronounced with the hey as it should be. So a teacher could write that on the board. If that's one of the 7 shemot, would erasure of that blackboard involve a violation? So there is a school of thought that says yes. So then what do you do with the blackboard? Seamus. Seamus. That's what you would have to do, according to at least one school of thought. So what is considered erasure that involves an Issa D'Oraisa? So there's a Mishnah, another Mishnah, Masechet Shabbat, in Kuf Chav, where there's an argument, and this is very, very important, principally in terms of modern-day survival in the technological world. Much of what the Somet Institute does, there are 2 institutes that try to make our lives easier in terms of modernity and technical equipment and electronics and so forth. One is the Institute of Science and Halacha, Rabbi Halperin, and which is viewed as being ki'ilu more Haredi, and the other is the Somet Institute based in Alon Short. They put out they're here somewhere, the Tchumen that we're all familiar with. That's Rabbi Yisrael Rosen. They're now the ones that are responsible for the content of the Alon Shabbat B'Shabbato that used to be under the aegis of the Mizrahi. And they also have an approach. They are not always seeing eye to eye. The basic tenet of how much, not all, but much of what Somet does is to take everything that we need to make available for those such as, for example, army personnel, the Rosh Memshalah, and other people who do need, from a halachic point of view, to be able to use a telephone or to write and so forth and so on. What we want to try to do is if there are any activities like this that are necessary, so if you have no choice, you do it, and you do it in whatever is the most effective means. But if you can create an effective means so that instead of doing an activity that for everyone else would involve a scriptural prohibition, you can reduce it and perform the activity in such a way that it is only a rabbinic prohibition for those who shouldn't be doing it, that's preferred even for the one who is sanctioned to do it, so long as it doesn't compromise, let's say, life-saving and so forth and so on, because then if it does, then clearly you do what you need to do. That's why really great poskim say when you need to call in an emergency situation, you don't look around for a kid and go, okay, you go and do it. Rather, the Rav or the Gadol who's in the audience at the time, he's the one who should do it. And you don't start playing around and wasting precious seconds, which really cuts the efficacy of the treatment that's called for. So what Somet does is it takes many of these activities, and instead of there being a direct result of your action, what happens is your action is only an indirect causative, called in halakhic terminology, grama. You're causing something to happen. Let me give you an example. In Teaneck we had the Somet Shabbos phone for the 9,000 doctors that were in shul every Shabbos. I'm not kidding. There was once a father who fainted, Sukkot, which is when the shul was platzing. They had to do the Hoshanas outside the building. And so, of course, they right away called the local Teaneck ambulance squad, which is half from. And the procedure in Teaneck is that when an ambulance squad is called, the police automatically dispatch an officer to the scene. So it happened that the officer got to the shul before the ambulance squad. So he walks into the room where we were davening. It was like 500 people in a room built for 300. And he says, is anyone here a doctor? And like 95, 100 hands from both sides of the mechitza go shooting up. And the guy didn't know what hit him. So we had a Somet Shabbos phone. Normally when you dial and you press the number 2, that immediately sends the pulses that are identified as a number 2. With the gramophone, whatever you do, nothing happens. Only every 2 seconds, things get dialed. So what you did is you pressed a button. It did cause the number 2 to be dialed, but not directly. Only when the phone felt like doing it a couple of seconds later. That's called grama. There is a machloket regarding grama in Masechah Shabbos. Reb Shimon, for example, allows grama to stop and extinguish a fire. So, for example, the Mishnah says, Osin mechitza b'chol hakelim bein meleim bein reikanim. There's a fire that's about to spread, not necessarily life-threatening, but it's about to spread. You would like it not to spread. You would like to contain the material damage. So you can build a barrier of various utensils that will serve as, sorry to use a technological term, but it once wasn't technological, something called a firewall. You can build a firewall out of these utensils. And the Mishnah says, whether the utensils are full or not. Now, what does it mean they're full? What would they be filled with? Water. So the utensil, if it's subject to being split by the heat, then as a result, what happens, instead of containing the fire, the water will spill out of the burst utensil and actually douse the fire. You didn't directly put out the fire, but you indirectly caused that by introducing water onto the theater, onto the stage. And therefore, that's called a grumma. So the opinion of Reb Shimon is, that's fine, no problem. Comes Reb Yossi and he says, no way, not allowed to do that. Yeah, no way. If you have new utensils that are subject to bursting when they are exposed to the heat, you cannot use filled utensils like that, because basically you are causing indirectly to extinguish the fire. So that's the positions. Reb Shimon says grumma's okay. Rav Yossi says grumma's not okay. The Gemara comments and says, I have a contradiction to both schools of thought. And the Gemara brings the following brisa. Not a tattoo, but somebody had inked on his body the name of God. It sounds funny, but when you look at what some of the stars tattoo on themselves, if you watch an NBA game, you have to look for where there's a patch of untainted skin.
Ein Od Milvado is one of Ein Od Milvado is one of the popular tattoos these days.
Oh, okay. So some guy, so we're not talking about a tattoo as you'll see in a moment. We're talking about somebody that inked onto the body one of the shemot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he now has a mitzvah obligation to immerse in a mikveh. What's the problem? When he immerses in the mikveh, presumably the water will wash away the Shem Hashem. So the Brisa says, Hareza lo yirchotz, he shouldn't wash off that, he shouldn't anoint, v'lo yamod b'makom tinofet, nor should he stand, because actually he is a placard, a walking placard, of the Shem Hashem. He shouldn't stand in a place that's unseemly from a filth point of view to be exposed to the name of God. If he has a tefillah of mitzvah, korech aleha gumi v'tovel. This is presumably Reb Shimon speaking. You take like some kind of a bandage or some kind of a reed, and you wrap it. The Gemara goes on to say not too tightly because the water has to get in there. You wrap it around the arm. Comes Rav Yossi and he says, no, if you have a tefillah of mitzvah, then you do what you got to do. Whatever happens, happens. The only thing, says Rav Yossi, is don't go like this to rub it out, but you immerse in the mikvah. So what do we see? Rav Yossi, who we presume to forbid grama, here basically says, if you have to go, you have to go. So if grama causes the erasure of the name of God from his body, so be it. So he's kind of here all of a sudden he's lenient. And Reb Shimon, who beforehand we were told is lenient and allows grama, he says, no, you got to put this whole bandage over. So everybody agrees that you can't directly rub out the name of Hashem. So regarding Rabbi Yossi, the Gemara says we can resolve it. Why? Because with regards to erasing the name of Hashem, what did the Torah say? The Torah said, "V'ibadetem et shema min hamakom ahu, lo ta'asun kein l'Hashem Elokeichem." We had a mandate and a requirement to actively get rid of vestiges of idolatry and Shmot Elilim and so forth, wherever they are. And then, correlating to that, we are told, on the flip side, don't chas v'sholom do that with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Do what? Indirect erasure? No. We were told, v'ibadetem, do something to actively and directly erase the names of idolatry. So therefore, when the Torah says, Lo ta'asum kein l'Hashem Elokeichem, the Torah is speaking in the context only of active erasure of the name of God. Don't do that. But what can you do as far as the Torah is concerned? Indirect erasure of the name of Hashem. Why? I don't know. But so be it. That's the language that the Torah put forth. So therefore, indeed, generally Rabbi Yossi holds you can't do grama if you're not allowed to do the act directly. But in this case, the Torah's parlance was so unique. This is the one case where we can't do the direct deed. You are, however, allowed to do it through grama. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi's taken care of. Later on, the Gemara says, and what do you do with the rabbis, Reb Shimon, who we thought allows grama, and suddenly you have to put this bandage around? So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Do you think the bandage is there so that it shouldn't erase the name of God? That's not the case, because the water has to be able to get in. So why put on the bandage? Because the man's standing there naked. Naked, Shem Hashem. I mean, could you imagine going to the mikveh and there's a Sefer Torah spread open over the mikveh? Chas v'sholom. So from that perspective, because he's in the nude, we want to cover the Shem Hashem, see no evil. But not because we have a problem, Reb Shimon has a problem with erasing through grama the Shem Hashem.
So why doesn't Rabbi Yossi also require that for the same reason?
Okay, the Gemara goes on to ask that. It's not relevant to us. The Gemara goes back and forth. It has to do with whether you have to do tefillah bismana or not. Let me just say that Rabbi Yossi would agree, if you have some kind of a covering readily available that will not cause the delay of your immersion, by all means cover it. Good question that you asked, not germane to our unique, particular, narrow topic, but the Gemara definitely goes into that. But what do we see? That both, when it comes to Mechikat Shem Hashem, both Rabbi Yossi and Reb Shimon, either because they always hold grama is not a problem, or because of the unique language of the Torah's prohibition of erasing God's name, they both agree that as far as the Torah is concerned, if you had Yud K Vav K, and you caused indirect erasure of it, you've done nothing wrong on the Torah level. Everybody comes and agrees with that. Told the Avnei Nezer. Avnei Nezer lived into the 20th century, the Sachat Rebbe,